This might be pretty quick. I think we kind of have gone through this in a few other of these sort of meetings, so I'll just give you an update of what we've been working on. So one of the big focuses what my team's working on is migrating to Office 365 and in particular SharePoint Online. We are also trying to maintain existing systems until they're migrated and facilitate U.S. finance migration of critical systems to O365 Azure and identify and migrate, sorry I missed that, on-premise .NET solutions. So a good example of something we've been working on, and we have some Cognizant resources working on this right now, is incident and error tracking. This is a process that used to be relatively manual. What you're seeing now is an Excel form that was downloaded from SharePoint, completed by the business group. They filled out grids with values, they answered questions, they provided content, etc., and they submitted this document via SharePoint. We had a .NET solution running on a server with Windows service, Windows polling service, which would pick these files up and scrape out the financial information that you're seeing here, put it into a database, and then develop and produce reports off of it. So what we've pretty much done is gotten rid of that entire process. We've gotten rid of the documents, we've gotten rid of the .NET, we've gotten rid of the database, and we've gotten rid of the polling service, and what we're left with is a SharePoint online site that is simply a Windows form, an online form. So everything that used to be this document is now reduced down to these tabs, and the user simply goes in, fills these out, hits save for a draft, submit to put it through a workflow process, and upon completion, the status will update to completed, and we can do reporting off of it, which we intend to build in Power BI. A lot of it right now is being built off of either a .NET process which produces an output in Excel and dumps it back into SharePoint for the users to consume later. We plan to get rid of all that as well and just make these Power BI reports built off of the data that's being captured and stored in SharePoint Online. So the advantage to a lot of this is obviously we can do all of this without anything in Azure at the moment. We have no processes running, no stored procedures, nothing on a scheduler. This is being handled completely, more or less, out of the box SharePoint. I know this form's pretty fancy looking with tabs and validations and other things, but this is all being done through HTML editor and JavaScript. So there's nothing, we're not deploying any solutions here, we're not installing any custom web parts. This is all being done through basically front-end support. So the advantage of this obviously is down the road, from a support model standpoint, our end users can maintain the security on this. Our end users could also go in and update things like drop lists themselves. They don't need to redeploy anything. This can be edited real time in production. These are simply SharePoint lists driving these drops here. Even the forms and the data being captured is driven by SharePoint lists and SharePoint document libraries, so our site owners can just go in, and if they wanted to capture another data element, they simply add a new field to the list and put it on the form here, and they're done. They could probably develop it, test it, and roll it out in an afternoon. So I think this is a great way to kind of empower our end users to be able to modify and own their systems much more real time and with much less red tape than they're used to now. As I said in the past, this would either be a formal, web app, which would require dev, UAT, and deployment on a server, or it would be something very clunky and manual, like you were seeing before, where they would have to modify this form and then submit something to have it captured. So that's a pretty good example, and as you heard earlier, we are integrating the reporting aspect of this into Power BI. We don't quite have that up and running yet. We've got a lot going on in development. In terms of the Office 365 rollout, Power BI is probably one of the last elements. They recently launched Yammer and team sites and group sites, but Power BI is still kind of pending. But once we get it, it will be the new solution for most of our reporting. A lot of what we used to do in Excel or have .NET write out to reports, we can now do with Power BI. And that will be the final kind of integrated workflow. And the nice part about that is it also fits into this model where the end users can layer reports onto this. They can quickly add people to a Power BI working group, create a link in SharePoint to Power BI, or they can even embed Power BI right into SharePoint itself. We could easily add a tab, for example, on this menu that says reporting, for example, and if you click on the reporting tab, it would just be a window frame with an embedded Power BI report, which is probably where we're heading with the output of all this. Once everyone compiles their data and saves it, there'll probably be a dashboard component to this, which will display a couple of Power BI reports that will completely replace an entire library of reporting outputs that we used to have in the past. And the nice part is it will be just like this. It will be menu driven. So instead of producing physical reports and storing them in PDFs or Excel, it'll all be data and menu driven and just be an extra window here in this frame. So I think I've probably given you an extra 10 to 12 minutes back. And apologize if there's somebody who wasn't expecting to speak for another 10 minutes, but that's kind of all I have right now. If anyone has any questions.
Yeah, I have some things I can piggyback off of your content, Seth, just
Okay,
to
great, sure.
not put somebody in a bind.
Sure.
But
Sure.
yeah, if there's any, we'll open it up for questions. Any questions based on Seth's overview of the what he's doing in SharePoint?
Oh, and overall, this was one more enhanced piece. In general, we are migrating the entire SharePoint site by the end of the year, and all functionality, all content, and all associated .NET solutions that are interacting with SharePoint on our CGI servers are going to be rebuilt to hook into the new SharePoint site. And anything that we cannot rebuild in online forms or new workflow processes is going to get upgraded to the latest version of .NET and moved to Azure. I think we have 2 or 3 solutions that are slated for migration out of about 6 processes. So half are becoming SharePoint functionality, and the other half are getting promoted to Azure.
Okay, we have a question from June. What version of SharePoint is used here?
This is SharePoint Online, and it is not being this is the online version. We have no on-premises 2016 version. I think there's one up in Canada for compliance purposes, an on-premises server, but otherwise we're going with the Microsoft Online. Hopefully that.
And the difference between the two is Microsoft Online, SharePoint Online, is it that Microsoft is automatically basically patching the system as new features are released? Is that basically your take on what is the difference between 2016 and Online?
Yes, that, and also there are some limitations to the online version. There's some size limitations. There are some workflow retention limitations. There's some versioning, I think, of limitations. I think what we found with anything with the online at the moment, they kind of have scaled back. Um, what's the best way to put this? They've scaled back the volume, I guess, of the information that you can retrieve. So there's a cap limit in SharePoint of 5,000 records retrieved on screen. If you had the on-premises, you could bump that cap up a few thousand, but the online version caps you at 5,000 records retrieved on screen at any point in time. I think there's a workflow retention cap as well, and of 60 days, whereas if you were on the on-premises version, you could extend that or maybe possibly make it indefinite. So there are some data limitations and size limitations to the online option, but the maintenance goes away, and of course portability and flexibility outweighs that. So as a company-wide initiative, we're going with the online version, with the exception of a couple of Canadian sites.
Okay, and I see a couple of questions from Vikram here, and he has some questions on workflows. Basically, are there workflows in the new SharePoint? Nintex question mark: would users be able to create workflow and reach out to SharePoint admins owners to do that?
All right. This would probably be a good one to take offline, Vikram, if you want to schedule a quick meeting. But I'll give you the executive summary. Nintex is supported in the new environment. The licensing agreement we have is very limited because we're going with the online version. Right now, we have Nintex installed on our on-premises servers, which means once you have the install, you've got a carte blanche license to do whatever you want. In the new environment, because it's online, every usage of a workflow is against your licensing agreement. And by usage, it means every implementation of it and then subsequent use of it. So every time you're running it. So we can get into the complexity of that. Are workflows portable and compatible? Yes, we can convert them over to SharePoint Online, and there's an effort to do so. But the guidance is to, wherever possible, retire Nintex workflow and use SharePoint out-of-the-box workflow in its place if you can, because we don't have to worry about licensing agreements. In terms of workflow history, site migration, there's a whole effort right now underway to try to capture as much workflow history and move it over during the migration phase. The U.S. finance site, we're doing it a little differently. We're just rebuilding and starting from scratch. But if you support or work with any other sites, those sites are going through a lift and drop migration, and they're trying to, one of the outstanding items right now is how to capture workflow history and move it. And then the one big problem with Microsoft out-of-the-box workflow versus Nintex is the Microsoft out-of-the-box workflow, I believe, has a 60-day retention on workflow history, and then it purges. And this is one of the online issues. Nintex has an indefinite workflow retention history. So one of the business cases for using Nintex is if you, for audit purposes, need an indefinite or long-term workflow history for audit purposes, you'd want to use a Nintex workflow, and then you'd have to work that into the licensing agreements. If it's a disposable workflow just to sign off or something like that and change the status of something, you don't really care, there's no SOX compliance or anything like that, then you are encouraged to use the Microsoft workflow, which after 60 days will drop the history of who signed off where and when. You'll just end up with the final status that it's approved or something like that. So I know that was a lot of information and a very long answer. And if anyone has workflow related questions, it definitely would warrant an offline discussion and a meeting, because there's a lot of complexities around that. It's one of the big pain points of the migration right now.
Okay, thank you, Seth. Are there any other questions? Let's see. We have approximately 5 minutes, so I'll bridge the gap here. I'm going to get into some of the things that I've done with SharePoint Online that build on what Seth is presenting. Um, and I think this will be a good segue into the next topic. So the SharePoint Online site for Finance IT is set up. It's not really considered the main site yet, but I've done a couple of things so far with it that are interesting. So a couple of highlights that I want to mention that make SharePoint Online perhaps better than the previous versions of SharePoint are permissions and wikis. And so just to give you an idea of what I see on the permission side, we've sent out this Q2 Finance IT Stakeholder Survey. And if I go to settings, prior to SharePoint Online, you could set up surveys in SharePoint, but you had to specify specific users. One thing that SharePoint Online allows is for you to grant rights to everyone or everyone except external users. So essentially, everyone, even external email addresses, etc., or everybody within the greater Manulife network. And so that's one thing that's helped me facilitate these surveys internally and without resorting to an external solution like SurveyMonkey. I can build it right here in SharePoint and allow anybody in the organization to view that survey, respond to the survey, so long as they hit the link.
And Brett, you actually bring up a great point. I totally forgot to mention we are cleaning up and streamlining all security on all the sites we support. And as you can see right now, everything's been boiled down to contributors, readers, admin, designers, and owners. And what you're showing on screen right now.
Mm-hmm.
We are encouraging site owners as they move their content over to review and streamline and reduce the amount of security and maintenance in SharePoint Online.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Also, what I've been involved with is really piloting and checking out the wiki feature within SharePoint, which is really an easy way to develop, say, a website within SharePoint. I have one for Citizen Developer, something that hopefully I can work on and get some traction with sometime soon. But as you can see, it's pretty simple. I can hit edit. I can edit my content. Use standard sort of themes and header sizes when I'm editing my content. And also, I can link to subsites. And just to kind of show you how that works within Wiki, if I put double brackets around anything, it basically will give me a new link. And then if I click on that new link, I can create a site. And otherwise, if I already have a site, it will point me to that site. And I've played around with some applications like discussion boards, for instance. So this is definitely a feature in SharePoint that was less intuitive before. That's very easy to use in order to set up some of these quick wiki sites. Any questions on that? Okay. So let me, in that case,
sorry, Brett, one last thought. As we start to roll out and you get involved with any Office 365 products or features, they have a lot of Yammer sites and group sites established for each of the Office 365 components, and they're pretty well maintained and well responded to. So any questions you have, I would recommend going out onto O365, finding the Yammer group or team site associated with the app you have a question about, and posting something there. You'll probably get a pretty quick response.